heavens! Magnus!
If we're talking about the greatest characters to ever come out of Marvel Comics, there's no way I'm skipping over Magneto. Call me biased, but the sheer complexity of this character, from his beginnings to his abilities, there's just so much to look at. But what if I told you that a crucial part of Magneto's life is the topic of today's video? We're going to be talking at length about his family tree. And honestly, it's a genealogical crime scene at best, but we're going to stick to calling it a family tree for now. We're going to be exploring decades of Marvel storytelling today, and we're going to be looking at some very iconic characters, some of which I'm sure will have you saying, how the heck are they related to Magneto? Well, if that isn't a compliment to the master of magnetism, I don't know what is. So yeah, the House of Magnus, with all its history and so much more, is going to be explored in this video. So sit back and allow me to welcome you to the magnetic family tree of Magneto. Let's get right into it.
My name is Magneto.
Let's start with the head of the table, none other than Erich Lehnsherr himself. Technically, his birth name was Max Eisenhardt, and he suffered a whole bunch of tragedy at the hands of the Nazis during his formative years. X-Men: Magneto Testament by Greg Pak tells you everything you need to know. Born to a Jewish family in Nuremberg, Germany, Max had a fairly standard childhood, but that wouldn't last long because the Third Reich was on the rise. Sensing the ominous situation that was brewing, his father, Jakob Eisenhardt, thought it would be better for all of their safety to simply relocate the family to Poland. Little did they know that Warsaw was going to be just as difficult for them. They were captured by Nazi soldiers when they tried to leave Warsaw, and soon enough they were shown no mercy. The family was executed in cold blood. Jakob Eisenhardt tried to save his young son, but he didn't know that Max had somehow gone into hiding in the same mass grave where his own relatives' bodies were thrown. This didn't last long though, since Max too was captured by the Nazis, and instead of a painless death right away, he was ordered to suffer by being sent to Auschwitz. This is not only his origin story, it's also what I consider to be the building blocks of Magneto. Watching your own family get murdered in front of you and hiding amongst their corpses to save yourself is a situation no child should ever find themselves in. Therefore, Max's worldview, his inherent distrust and hatred of humans, and also his never-ending drive to protect mutant kind at all costs, these elements of his character can all be traced back to the catastrophic time of the Holocaust. And that's what made Magneto, the Magneto we know today. Keep this in mind as we move ahead. It wasn't until World War II ended that Max Eisenhardt decided to change his name and become Magnus, and then eventually Erich Lehnsherr. After all those years of witnessing, as well as enduring suffering, pain, and destruction, his initial return to a normal world was due to Magda. Magda was a Romani woman who he had known since he was a kid. Reunited in the Auschwitz concentration camp, the two of them escaped together to build a quiet life for themselves in a mountain village. There, they even welcomed their first daughter, named Anya. It finally felt like things were going well for Magnus, and why wouldn't he think that? The war was over, and he had just started to build a loving family, but that peace was shattered, and it didn't take long. The family decided to move to a larger city called Venezia. There, Magnus, now known as Magneto, used his powers to go at it against his boss, which forced the KGB to intervene. The punishment for this turned out to be reminiscent of his Holocaust days. He was forced to watch as a fire consumed his family home, with young Anya still inside. The authorities prevented him from saving her, and this moment absolutely destroyed Magnus on the inside like no other, even more than what was done to him in the Holocaust. He lashed out as a result and killed the KGB officers right after. He showed no mercy to those who had killed his daughter, but this rage was something that made Magda terrified of him. So she left, but she didn't leave alone. Magda was pregnant with twins at that moment and would never let Magneto know about them, ever. Those twins, as you might have guessed, would grow into Pietro and Wanda Maximoff. However, none of this would have played out the way it did if those KGB officers hadn't been so inhumane of their treatment of Magnus and Anya. Eventually, Magneto would realize that his rage was a double-edged sword. Because of it, he could stop hiding and start bringing the fight to those who had ruined his life, but it also caused his wife Magda to leave him out of a newly born fear of him. To her, He was almost a different man. He was no longer Magnus, he was now Magneto. And little did Magneto know how often and how much his inability to control his rage would come back to bite him. I'm repeating myself a bit, but keep that in mind as we move forward. As we mentioned, Magda, after leaving Magneto, would go on to give birth to the Maximoff twins, Wanda and Pietro, more commonly known as the Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver. Just a heads up, this branch of Magneto's family tree is the most confusing one by a mile. You see, Wanda and Pietro were both thought of as Magneto's biological children, and that too for decades. I'm sure you've heard this as well, right? And that's the weird part. Let's fast forward for a second to when the twins came across Magneto decades later. Magneto recruited the pair of them for his Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. Their relationship here was formal in nature and highlighted by the general coldness shown by Magneto towards them. To him, they were merely soldiers and nothing else. So, obviously, he wasn't going to feel any special affection for them, but the truth hit them all like a wrecking ball. In Vision and the Scarlet Witch, number 4, we saw Magneto track down Magda's path to Wundagore, and he learned that she had given birth to a specific pair of twins before fleeing forever. That was where Magneto had a life-changing realization. He didn't wait too long to reveal this to Wanda and Pietro, with the hopes of a possible family reunion of sorts. But even a revelation of that scale didn't help curb their strained bond. It was particularly hard on Wanda, who couldn't decide between accepting her family or rejecting Magneto's ideology. Her powers were always fraught with chaos and unpredictability, which was a byproduct of her upbringing, but Magneto, sensing Wanda's latent power, saw a reflection of himself as well as Magda in her. As a result, their relationship was all back and forth and push and pull. However, in 2014, there was a massive revelation that changed the course pretty much completely. I'm talking about the Axis event, where Wanda herself uttered the words, "Strike my family down," during a magical battle. Pietro was in fact struck down, but Magneto wasn't. Soon after, it was revealed that Magneto wasn't their biological father in the first place. In fact, their true parents were Django and Maria Maximoff. This Romani couple had raised them. Then, we were also told, despite 50 years of stories saying otherwise, Wanda and Pietro weren't actually mutants. Their powers were the result of the High Evolutionaries' tampering, which was the actual explanation they went with. If you think this sounds like a mess now, with me just describing it to you, imagine how the fans reacted back then. They were kind of upset about the whole thing because it seemed like a way to ensure that Disney, who had the rights to the Avengers characters but not the X-Men or mutants, would be able to use these characters going forward. Today, this is still regarded as one of the most controversial creative decisions Marvel Comics editorial has ever made. Fans of Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver saw it as a betrayal, and some of them even stopped reading altogether. Decades of storytelling had added bits and pieces to the almost father-daughter dynamic between Wanda and Magneto, and that was just fumbled, just like that. We understand the reaction. It was totally valid. Wanda was a complex character, and the emotional parts of her, or sometimes the lack of emotional parts of her, really made her stand out. Recently, the Trial of Magneto storyline had a similar path where they connected Wanda and Magneto through their mutually shared set of magic skills rather than blood. She had cast a spell which required the offspring of Krakoa's founders, but when that spell turned out to be unsuccessful, Lorna Dane realized that Wanda should have been the third participant instead. Initially hesitant because Wanda didn't think she was related to Magneto at all, Lorna tells her, "You're just as much his daughter as I am," and guess what? That made all the difference. The spell worked, confirming that Wanda was Magneto's child, but only in a magical and emotional sense. Regardless of genetics, they shared a father-daughter dynamic which happened to highlight the definition of family being something you choose. Now let's move on to Wanda's brother, Quicksilver. Pietro has a fascinating character arc across the comics. It's almost like a bitter alternative rendition of Wanda's arc. He's the son who has always been desperate for his father's approval, but was only met with disgust and contempt from Magneto. Wanda was always the likable one in Magneto's eyes, but the contrast in how he viewed the twins couldn't possibly have prepared you for what unfolded after the events of House of M. Magneto murdered his own son. That's an actual thing that happened. You see, ever since the beginning, Pietro had seen Wanda being favored by Magneto and wanted things his way. After Wanda had a breakdown and destroyed the Avengers, he decided to manipulate her into rewriting reality instead of letting the Avengers and the X-Men decide what should be done with her. This resulted in the House of M universe, where everybody Wanda knew got their deepest desire, and mutants ruled the world, led by Magneto and the House of M. Eventually, Wanda's magic was undone, and when that happened, Magneto blamed the entire event on Pietro. You know what happened next. Still, this is comic books, and Pietro was resurrected, but it turned out that the Axis retcon a few years later had a much different effect on him than it did on his sister. Wanda's bond with Magneto was strengthened, whereas Pietro only got more repulsed with the idea of reconciling in the first place. Since then, the siblings have remained distanced. In some ways, Wanda and Pietro are the perfect siblings. Same beginnings, same retcon, same father, but they couldn't possibly relate to one another's stories in an emotional sense. I mean, you gotta feel for Pietro. Parental neglect, abuse, rejection, that's the kind of relationship that leaves a scar that lasts forever. His long-standing need to earn his father's approval will always be his biggest enemy. Let's move on to Magneto's third child, Lorna Dane, Polaris herself. Despite being Magnus's only confirmed biological offspring, Lorna's got tragedy written all over her origins. When she was little, her mutant powers were activated for the first time during a plane ride. I mean, to be fair, it was a very traumatic plane ride due to the stress she was going through from having to constantly watch her adoptive parents fight. Due to this, her magnetic abilities lashed out for the first time, and oh boy did they lash out. Lorna destroyed the entire plane and killed her adoptive parents. Magneto got this news and had one of his evil mutants, Mastermind, use his mental powers to make Lorna completely forget about her upbringing. This caused her to grow up with the belief that she was an orphan from the very beginning. Years later, in the future, Magneto masqueraded as her father to manipulate her into joining him. Iceman, meanwhile, was busy researching Lorna and found out that her parents died in a plane crash, which made everyone believe that Magneto was never Lorna's father, but the truth only saw the light of day decades later. Lorna relocated to Magneto's Genosha Island, conducted some blood tests there, and eventually confirmed that she was the real biological daughter of Magneto. Her mother had an affair with him, and that's how she discovered their relationship. Ever since this revelation, Lorna has spent years in an ongoing process of dealing with it and trying to gain his respect. As the only child who hasn't distanced themselves from Magneto, her arc showcases her emotional self throughout the modern Magneto era. A daughter is trying to build a real relationship with her father. That's it. It's actually kind of simple to understand for comics. It's a trope that speaks universally, and a character who's so emotionally complex yet underrated, which makes Lorna one of a kind. Now let's skip ahead a generation. Wanda's children, Wiccan and Speed, bring a new chapter to the family tree as a whole, while still extending from the more convoluted branches of it. During the House of M era, Wanda had some children that she magicked up, and from the souls of those imaginary children came Billy Kaplan and Tommy Shepard. During Avengers Children's Crusade, they finally learned that Wanda was their real mother. With that, they realized who their grandfather was as well. When the two finally met Magneto, it was warm and felt like a true embrace of family. We got to see two things that are pretty rare in Marvel Comics: Magneto's tender side and a straightforward relationship between Magneto and some kids. And it only got better over time. Magneto sees Billy and Tommy as his real grandchildren, overlooking, or rather intentionally ignoring, the Axis retcon, which technically cut the biological connection between Magneto and Wanda. Billy is better known as the powerful warlock Wiccan, and Tommy, like his uncle Pietro, became a white-haired speedster named, well, Speed. These two are the future of the family. Maybe that's why Magneto is so warm with them. It's all about heritage for him, and it shows here. The dynamic between the two sides is built and developed with every new storyline. And it seems like he genuinely cares for them, although with Magneto, it's hard to tell. So far, we've covered the second generation and even the third generation of Magneto's family, so to move forward, we're going to have to branch out. The extended family tree branches out pretty much across the Marvel Universe. Allow me to explain. Back in 1974, Pietro married an Inhuman princess named Crystal. This was the first ever marriage between a human and an Inhuman. They had a daughter named Luna, who got the best of her parents' genetics. She developed empathy, much like an ability possessed by an Inhuman, and she represented Magneto's bloodline in an entirely different ecosystem. Intriguingly, despite tensions never easing between Quicksilver and Magneto, as they did with Scarlet Witch, it was wholesome to watch Magneto set his differences aside to welcome Luna with open arms. He considered her a truly precious grandchild, but this is kind of a recurring theme with Magneto, his acceptance. When Wanda was married to Vision, he was handsomely welcomed to the family by Magneto, as seen in the 1986 release, Vision and the Scarlet Witch #6, where he attended a Thanksgiving dinner hosted by his new son-in-law. This dynamic sounds even crazier when you realize that the Vision and Magneto have battled each other several times over the years before this. However, family clearly comes first for Magneto as the senior patriarch. His maturity with this peace offering to an Avenger is an odd, heartwarming moment. Circling back to Luna, she's living proof of the size of the familial network Magneto has managed to build over the years, a network that's moved beyond even mutants at this point. Luna bridges the gap between the worlds of the Inhumans and the mutants, and with responsibilities like that, her story is just beginning, and we're excited to see where it goes. Although, to be fair, it hasn't gone very far in the 40 years since she was introduced. Now, we've already talked about how absurd this family tree is, but this is Marvel Comics, so believe it or not, it's just the tip of the iceberg. Stick with me on this one. Back in the 90s, there was a villain named Astra who wanted to eliminate Magneto and decided to make a clone named Joseph to do the job instead. That attempt failed miserably, and Joseph was left as an amnesiac. He then lived among the X-Men, believing himself to be a younger version of Magneto, and he even went on to have a romantic entanglement with Rogue. He also sacrificed himself to stop Magneto's reign of power, but before he died, he helped to kill the Scarlet Witch. That plan technically failed, which led to the sacrifice we were talking about, but remember, this Joseph guy was a nobody. He wasn't part of the family by blood or choice, he simply brought a new angle to the question of what really counts as family. Magneto has never viewed or even acknowledged Joseph as part of his family, in spite of the fact that Joseph's story intersects with the X-Men quite often, and that too in very complicated ways. We couldn't do a family tree of Magneto without mentioning Joseph, even if he's off on his own little sub-branch. Now, let's move on to Elena Perez. More recently introduced, she also goes by the name Ire, or Queen of Wrath, and she brings to the table the added layer of the chosen family trope. When she was a child, Elena witnessed a brutal attack by Magneto, and that event was responsible for activating her own mutant powers. She can conjure flames and even spark rage in others. Soon enough, she went on to make the claim that she was Magneto's daughter on the grounds of being born, or rather reborn in such a form, purely because of his rage. When she died in Magneto's arms, he admitted she should rightfully be considered his daughter, even though they have no biological connection. So, there's another emotional addition to the family tree, but this addition is made even more interesting when you learn how hell-bent Marvel is when it comes to expanding Magneto's family tree after all these decades, because this is a recent story from a flashback miniseries. I mean, even if it was just an emotional connection, you can't tell me she wasn't intended to be his daughter after all. Her journey echoes the themes that are so very prominent with members of this family tree. Elena faces trauma, deals with power, and suffers from a desperate need for connection. And her death was almost like a wish come true, especially considering how rarely Magneto's emotional side came to the surface at this point in his life. Now, we've been through blood relations, emotional relations, and even relations outside the realm of the lore. So now, let's explore some alternate realities that add even more branches to the House of Magnus. In the Age of Apocalypse timeline, we saw Magneto marry Rogue, and the two had a son named Charles, named after the fallen Professor Xavier. In a timeline where Xavier never lived long enough to reconcile with Magnus, this was a surprisingly emotional move from Magneto. This just goes to show how strong the bond between these two mutant leaders was, even in an alternate reality. In the Age of Apocalypse, Magneto isn't just a warrior, but a survivor as well. On top of that, though, he's also a family man, more so than in any other version we've seen of him. He's a husband and father, and he takes those responsibilities very seriously. His son, Charles, is a symbol of hope and a reminder of Xavier's dream, and the one to carry the flame started by his father and his namesake. The alternate reality branches don't stop there, though. Let's take a look at Earth 2182, which gives us the daughter of Wanda Maximoff and Nightcrawler, named Nocturne. I know there's a lot to digest in that previous sentence, but the bullet point is that Nocturne is Magneto's alternate universe granddaughter. Talia Josephine Wagner, or Nocturne, got the best of both worlds when inheriting her parents' abilities. She got her dad's blue fur and tail and her mother's magical abilities. She's a blend, and one that works like no other. Her adventures with the Exiles, as well as her run within the main Marvel universe, showcased her Earth 616 family. Their interactions were usually limited, but they added another layer to an already complex web of family connections. Now, we've mentioned a lot of big names in the Marvel Universe, but we've been dancing around one of the biggest. How could we talk about the House of Magnus without talking about Charlie Xavier himself? Well, there's no blood relation between the two mutant leaders. The dynamic they share is, in a way, very familial in nature. For example, there was a time where Xavier shut down Magneto's mind, believing his friend would always be driven by his murderous rage for humans. Magneto's rage and grief fused with Xavier's own darkness, which was suppressed within him, and it went on to create a separate entity called Onslaught. This psionic monster was the personification of their bond, and it was a world-ending threat. Imagine how close you have to be with someone for the relationship to birth a psionic monster. It's kinda hilarious as I narrate this out loud, but that doesn't take away from the intensity of their bond. Let's take a look at where this friendship started. Magneto was actually the one who saved Xavier's life after an assassination attempt. This would turn out to be the emotional axis of the X-Men's mythology for decades to come. Simply put, Xavier is the closest thing Magneto has to an equal. They're two sides of the same coin. There are plenty of differences between them. One believes in coexistence, and the other believes in mutant supremacy, after all, but that doesn't hinder their mutually agreed-upon fundamentals, doing whatever it takes to protect their people. Now, let's move on to the final names on my list for today, Fabian Cortez and the Acolytes. These folks are more followers than family, and while they might not belong in the family tree itself, I believe they deserve to be acknowledged as part of Magneto's found family of devoted followers. Particularly Cortez, who's a manipulative, controlling sycophant, who was also a huge worshiper of Magneto back in his evil mutant days, in a way that made the devotion feel like religious zealotry. It was toxic and self-serving, and everybody could sense that right away. Meanwhile, the Acolytes as a whole represented Magneto's first real attempt at building a community strictly of the mutants that were dedicated to his cause. The Acolytes shared an emotional bond with Magneto in spite of not being blood relatives in any way. But they're also kind of a footnote when you consider the larger picture, especially the fact that Magneto has since distanced himself from them. That said, it's a good reminder that Magneto has always attracted followers and devotees. The irony here is that despite all of that, Magneto himself has lived a life where he's mostly avoided the idea of finding a true connection.
Magneto lives!
Sadly though, we've reached the roots of the magnetic family tree of Magneto. We went through it all. Blood relatives, chosen family, emotional bonds, clones, alternate universes, cosmic in-laws, and more. Here at the end, I think it's important to note that this family tree has one common story that it's trying to tell us. You see, the whole thing starts with a man who lost everything to hatred and has spent every decade since desperately trying to prevent those same mistakes from happening again. Surviving the Holocaust and then still having to bury your own daughter is absolutely heartbreaking. And I mean, so is being cloned against your will. However, Magneto still finds a way to show up for Thanksgiving and celebrate with his new android son-in-law. And that's exactly what the House of Magnus is. People overcomplicate their understanding of this by overlooking the basic concept of a man refusing to stop building a family of his own, even though that's something that's been taken away from him again and again. The real tragedy of Magneto is that he possesses immense power and rage, but he's never been able to use it to protect the people he loves the most. That said, it's inspiring because he never stops. He never gives up, and maybe that stubbornness is what keeps him alive and ticking even today. I've said it before, and I'll say it again, the Magneto family tree is a genealogical crime scene. It's one of the most complicated family trees in comics, and that's exactly what works in their favor too. It's messy, it's painful, and it's a lot to deal with, plus it even contradicts itself at times. But all of those descriptions also describe the main man at the center of this family tree, Magneto himself. Now, if you enjoyed this video, consider leaving a like and subscribe. That's the best way to see more videos like it, and it really helps us in making new videos like this one. We'd also love to know your favorite member of the Magneto family tree in the comments section down below. Otherwise, thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and we'll see you next time. Oh, and for the true believers out there, Excelsior.